Hey everyone and welcome. Today we are diving into something really special, a book called Borges in Love by Lázaro Draznés. It imagines the secret letters of the literary giant Jorge Luis Borges. We get this incredible peek into his heart and soul through the unsent letters between him and the 5 most important women in his life. It's absolutely fascinating.
So get this for a premise. The book imagines that Borges, after he passes away, finds himself in his own version of heaven, a library that goes on forever. And there, on one of the shelves, he finds this book, the collection of all the letters he wished he'd sent and all the ones he wished he'd received. It's his chance, and our chance, to finally understand the loves and the heartbreaks that really defined him.
So, of course, where else could we possibly start but with his mother, Leonor Acevedo. She was, without a doubt, the most powerful force in his life, a figure of just immense influence, incredible support, and, as you're about to see, some serious control. And this is where things get really interesting. You see this fundamental conflict right here. Borges himself felt this deep shame about being a bookish person. He kind of romanticized a life of action. But his mother? Oh, she had zero doubts. For her, he was destined to be the great writer his own father couldn't be because of his failing eyesight. It wasn't a choice, it was his destiny.
And don't think for a second she was just a cheerleader. Nope, she was his sharpest, most ferocious critic. She would challenge him constantly, especially on his obsession with the whole gritty, knife-fighting mythology of old Buenos Aires. She had a very specific vision for his legacy, and she was not afraid to tell him when he was straying from it.
I mean, you want to talk about a force of nature? Just listen to this. That was her actual response to a death threat she got over the phone. Can you believe it? It just perfectly captures that defiant, steely character that ran through the entire Borges family. Absolutely fearless.
So with that kind of intense maternal bond, you have to wonder, what did his romantic life look like? Well, often, it was a landscape of passionate failure. And that brings us to Estela Canto, a brilliant, modern woman who would become his great, unattainable muse.
And through these imagined letters, wow, we get a side of Borges you almost never see. This isn't the lofty intellectual creating labyrinths in his stories. This is a man who was just raw, vulnerable, and completely overwhelmed by love, just laying his soul bare.
And here's the tragic disconnect. Borges, probably guided by his mother, was doing this very old-fashioned, almost Victorian courtship. But Estela, she was a woman of her time, incredibly direct, honest, and not playing by those old rules. Her response here is so gentle, but it is just devastatingly final. Their two worlds were just never going to line up.
So what does a literary genius do with that kind of heartbreak? Well, he channels it into pure genius. He writes The Aleph, one of his most famous stories, about a single point in space that contains the entire universe, and he dedicates it to her. It's this incredible literary monument to a love that was infinite, all-consuming, and totally out of his grasp.
Okay, so from that intense, unrequited passion, the story takes a much darker turn. We move into his brief and frankly disastrous marriage to Elsa Astete Millán. The book paints this as a union born not out of love, but out of his mother's desperate fear that he'd be left all alone after she died.
And this slide, it just says it all, doesn't it? His world was entirely internal. It was about literature, fame, his dreams. He felt like he was having his quarter of an hour on the world stage. Her world, on the other hand, was practical, down to earth, and she had absolutely zero interest in his intellectual life. The disconnect is just painful.
And this is his imagined conclusion to the whole affair. It is so perfectly Borges. He's not looking for a fight, there's no drama. He just wants to erase the whole painful mistake. For him, the ultimate peace, the only real revenge or forgiveness, is simply to forget.
So we've seen the overpowering mother, the unattainable muse, the disastrous marriage, which leads to the big question, right? After all of that heartbreak, did Borges ever find any kind of happiness or peace in his final years?
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most complicated and controversial figure in his life, María Kodama. She started out as his student, then became his secretary, his travel companion, and then, right at the very end of his life, his wife.
You can really feel his fear in these imagined letters, can't you? It's this deep reliance on Maria, but it's also a raw terror of being abandoned. He was old, he was blind, and his entire world had shrunk down to this one person. This isn't just a love letter, it feels like a desperate plea not to be left alone.
But the book imagines one final, absolutely gut-wrenching twist. A last, desperate letter from Borges begging not to be taken to Geneva to die. He feels kidnapped, torn away from his home, Buenos Aires, from his entire culture, and from the family tomb where he always expected to be buried. It is a truly devastating final image of this great writer.
And this is where the book leaves us, with Borges' own final, crushing judgment on his life. Just let that sink in for a moment. After all the literary triumphs, all the awards, a legacy that literally changed world literature, his own verdict is that he failed at the most basic thing, being happy. What a profoundly sad and thought-provoking idea to end on.
Look, we have barely even scratched the surface of the incredible imagined emotional journey in this book. If this story grabbed you, if you want to experience the full power of these letters for yourself, you've got to read Borges in Love. We've made it easy for you and put the Amazon link right in the description below. Thanks so much for tuning in.